They didn't knock like neighbors. Neighbors tap? Or ring twice and call your name through the door. These two knocked like they had a right to whatever waited on the other side. 3 firm knocks. No hesitation. By the time the sound finished echoing through my little house, my hands had already started to tremble. I dried them on the dish towel anyway, out of habit. Old women like me cling to little dignities. The kettle hissed softly on the stove, and for half a heartbeat I told myself, maybe it's just a delivery. Maybe it's the wrong address. But I knew better. At my age, you feel the difference between ordinary life and something else. When I opened the door, they were standing there. A woman in a navy blazer with kind, professional eyes, and a man with a clipboard pressed to his chest like a shield. "Mrs. Harper?" the woman asked. "Yes," I said, though it came out thinner than I hoped. "We're from Adult Protective Services. We received a report about your well-being and your capacity to manage your affairs. We'd like to ask a few questions, if that's all right with you." There it was. The fear I'd been trying to outrun for months folded itself neatly in my chest. I stepped aside and gestured them in the way my mother taught me. You always offer people a seat, even when they come to break your heart. The house smelled of lemon cleaner and Earl Grey. The woman commented that it was a lovely home. I tried not to look at the man scribbling something on his form. "Has anyone been mistreating you, Mrs. Harper?" she asked gently. "Has anyone tried to control your finances or isolate you?" I almost laughed. If it hadn't hurt so much, I might have. Because the cruelest thing about their questions was this: they were the right questions pointed at the wrong suspect. I gave them my best polite smile and folded my hands in my lap to keep them from shaking. "My dear," I said, "that depends. Do you mean now? Or for the past few years?" The man glanced up. The woman's gaze sharpened. They asked about my health, my bills, who helped me, whether I felt safe. Every answer I gave felt like stitching a story back together, slowly, firmly, in my own words this time. I fetched the folder from my little lockbox. Documents in plastic sleeves. The notarized letter from my lawyer. Bank statements. Property deeds in my name only. They flipped through them, brows softening. I watched them recognize what my daughter had refused to see. I was many things, old, lonely, a little slower, but I was not helpless. Not confused. Not a fragile ornament to be moved around her life like furniture. After nearly an hour, they stood to leave. "From what we can see," the woman said, "you're perfectly capable of handling your own affairs. This may have been a misunderstanding." I nodded. "Yes," I said quietly. "My daughter has had a few of those." They thanked me for my time, promised to close their file, and walked back down the path, their shoes crunching on the gravel my husband once laid by hand. When the door shut behind them, I leaned against it and closed my eyes. My heart was pounding, but not from fear anymore. From something sharper. Something that tasted like the end of pretending. Because that knock, you see, wasn't where this story began. That knock was only the sound of consequences finally arriving. The beginning was much softer. Just a cup of tea, a tired smile, and my daughter saying one quiet sentence that changed everything. It all started the day my own child sat at my kitchen table, took my hand and asked me to stop talking to the people who loved me most. If you had seen her that day, you'd have thought, what a good daughter. She arrived with a bag of groceries and a folder of papers tucked under her arm, kissed my cheek and said I looked tired. She always told me I looked tired. It was her way of making sure I remembered I needed her. "Mom, you shouldn't be getting the heavy milk cartons anymore," she said, putting things away before I could help. "You'll hurt your back." I wanted to say my back carried you and your brother and half this house for years, but I just smiled. At that point, I still believed love meant letting her have the last word. We sat at the table. She made the tea this time, which was rare. My daughter Clara liked to be busy with big things, contracts, meetings, important calls. Small gestures always felt strategic. She stirred honey into my cup and slid it toward me. "Mom," she said casually, "I need to talk to you about something." My stomach dropped. Whenever she began like that, something of mine disappeared afterward. An account, a decision, a small piece of my freedom. "Yes, dear," I answered. She leaned in, lowering her voice as if the walls had ears. "I really wish you wouldn't talk so much with the neighbors. Especially Mrs. Gray from next door. People like her, they twist things. They gossip. You're vulnerable, and I don't want you getting hurt." I remember staring at the steam curling up from my cup, thinking how harmless it looked. Steam always disappears before you can touch it. That's how her concern sounded, soft, fleeting, impossible to argue with. I just chat about the garden, I said. And the weather. Nothing important. That's the problem, she replied. It seems like nothing. But they fish for details. They find out about your finances, your habits. Then suddenly they're helping you sign something you don't understand. She said, helping the way some people say poisoning. I laughed weakly. No one here has tried to make me sign anything. I'm not willing to risk it. She snapped back, a little sharper than she meant to. Then her tone softened again. The way you scratch a cat too hard, then stroke its fur back flat. You only have me nearby, Mom. If something goes wrong, it's me who has to pick up the pieces. Just do this for me. Keep things to yourself. Please. There it was, the hook in the bait. Not do it for you. Do it for me. I nodded because that was how our roles had quietly reversed. She had become the mother, and I had become the child afraid of disappointing her. After that day, my world began to shrink in ways you don't notice until you try to breathe. Coffee invitations sat unanswered on my counter. Church flyers went straight to the drawer. When Mrs. Gray waved from her porch, I smiled and went back inside, pretending not to see the question in her eyes. Weeks turned into months. The phone rang less. The house grew quieter. Clara visited often, always with that helpful folder of papers. She'd slide them across the table with a practiced sigh. Sign here, Mom. Just simplifies things. I'll manage your bills. No need for you to worry at your age. Power of attorney. Joint accounts. A line here, a signature there. When I hesitated, she'd look hurt. Do you trust me or not? She'd ask. And what kind of mother wants to say no? Somewhere deep down, no. So I signed. I told myself it was love. I told myself this was what modern daughters did, took charge, took care, took over. It wasn't until one chilly afternoon, when I saw Mrs. Gray standing at the fence with a worried look and a copy of the local paper in her hand, that I realized someone else had been watching the walls close in on me. Elizabeth, she called softly, could we talk for a moment? It's about Clara. When your neighbor looks at you like she's about to tell you your house is on fire, and your daughter is holding the match, you either walk back inside, or you finally listen. We sat on my back porch because Mrs. Gray said hard things are easier to hear in fresh air. She brought over a plate of cookies she hadn't quite finished decorating, little smears of icing on the sides. That's how I knew she was nervous. Helen Gray never did anything halfway. Is this about the roses? I asked, trying to keep it light. I know they're climbing over your fence again. I'll trim them. She took a breath, folded her hands, and looked at me with eyes that had seen more things than mine ever would. It's not about roses, love, she said. It's about Clara. I felt my shoulders tense. She's been telling you not to talk to me, hasn't she? Helen asked, her voice gentle, not accusatory. I've seen the way you rush inside when I wave. I opened my mouth to deny it, then closed it again. There's something about getting old that strips away your energy for lying, especially to women who already know the truth. She worries I'll be taken advantage of, I said finally. Helen nodded slowly. She's right to worry about that, she murmured. She just forgot to mention who might be doing the taking. It was like the wind stopped. Helen, I warned. I'm not trying to turn you against your daughter, she said, reaching for my hand. But someone needs to turn you back toward yourself. She told me about the woman down the street, the one who used to host book clubs and now barely left her home. How Clara had been her real estate agent, charming as spring sunshine, helping her downsize into a smaller place. How the papers had been confusing, the changes subtle. How, by the end of it, the woman had lost more than her spare bedroom. She'd lost control of her own name on most of her accounts. Your Clara, Helen said carefully, has a reputation for knowing where vulnerable people keep their doors unlocked. Not their front doors, the ones to their lives. I shook my head. People gossip. They're jealous of her success. I thought so at first, she replied. Then I heard the same story from another widow. Different house. Same smile. Same signature at the bottom of the page next to theirs. I wanted to defend my daughter. I wanted to tell Helen she had her facts wrong, that she was reading shadows on the wall. But somewhere behind my ribs, A small stubborn memory wrapped on the inside of my chest. Clara's eyes flat and sharp when I'd once asked, "What exactly did I sign last year?" Her voice too quick. "Nothing you need to understand, Mom. Just trust me." I trusted. I trusted so hard I'd stopped asking questions. Helen must have seen something flicker in my face, because her fingers tightened around mine. "I'm telling you this because I love you," she said. "Not to shame her and not to scare you. But people like Clara, once they start using power that way, they don't usually stop until someone tells them no." I went very still. "Have you looked at your own papers lately?" she asked softly. That night after Helen went home, I sat on my living room floor with a box of files Clara had so graciously organized for my convenience. Her handwriting was everywhere. Neat labels, tidy folders. Inside the tidy folders were ugly truths. Her name on the bank account. Her name on my investment statements. Her name added as co-owner of my house, for smooth transfer later. Power of attorney signed on a day I remembered only for the soup she brought, not the rights I handed over. My husband's old watch was sitting on top of the box. I picked it up and held it in my palm like a compass. He used to say, "Fear is usually just your mind trying to tap you on the shoulder and say, 'Look closer.'" I looked closer. And the more I looked, the more I realized I wasn't afraid for no reason. For the first time in months, I didn't reach for Clara's number. I reached for my son's. "Nate," I said when he answered, "I think I've made a mess I don't know how to clean up." His silence told me he'd been waiting for this call. When your son quietly admits, "Mom, I've been worried about Clara for a long time," you finally understand that denial isn't protection. It's permission. Nathan lives 3 states away, but somehow his voice still carries the smell of his childhood bedroom. Socks, crayons, and stubborn honesty. "Mom," he said gently, "do you remember when Clara asked me to sign some papers about simplifying your inheritance? I didn't. Or maybe I'd chosen not to. Memory and avoidance feel very similar when you're tired. She told me it was just procedural," he continued. "But when I asked your lawyer about it, he said he hadn't prepared anything like that. When I pushed back, she got angry. Told me to stay out of it. We haven't really spoken since." He let that hang in the air between us. I felt ashamed. Ashamed that my son had seen something I refused to see. Ashamed that my daughter's anger had been enough to keep him at a distance. Ashamed that I had given one child's control more weight than another's concern. "I didn't want to worry you," he said. "You were grieving Dad. And Clara seemed to be helping." I told myself maybe I was being suspicious. But if Helen and your paperwork are saying the same thing, I think it's time you talk to someone who's on your side and knows the law. "Who?" I asked, even though a name had already begun rising through my memory like a bubble in water. "Didn't Dad have that friend? What was his name? The lawyer who helped you buy the house." "Paul," I whispered. "Paul Emerson." I hung up and sat with the phone clutched in my hand, thinking about all the times I'd made myself smaller to keep the peace. Smaller in conversations. Smaller in decisions. Smaller in my own home. There's a special kind of quiet rage that belongs to women my age. It isn't loud. It doesn't throw plates. Just stops apologizing. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual, as if my body understood I had something braver to do than water the plants. I put on my good blouse, the one Clara once said made me look too formal for your age, and called Paul's office. His secretary sounded surprised to hear my name. "Of course, Mrs. Harper," she said. "He'll be happy to see you. Can you come in tomorrow at 10? "Yes," I replied, before that familiar little voice inside could pipe up and ask Clara's opinion. When I walked into Paul's office the next day, it smelled of paper, coffee, and a faint trace of the cologne my husband used to wear. Time hadn't been gentle to Paul's hairline, but his eyes were as sharp as ever. "Elizabeth," he said, standing to hug me. "What brings you in?" I sat down, placed the fat envelope of documents on his desk, and heard myself say with a steadiness that surprised me, "I think my daughter has been helping herself while pretending to help me." He didn't rush. Didn't interrupt. He read quietly, page after page, his brows drawing together. When he finally looked up, his voice was very calm. "You're not imagining things," he said. "Your daughter has more access to your life than any adult child should. We can fix it, But you'll need to be ready for how she reacts when that power goes away. I swallowed. What do? We revoke her power of attorney. Close joint accounts. Transfer everything into a trust in your name alone. We document your capacity so no one can claim otherwise. And we do it before she knows we're doing it. I sat there, feeling the bones of the woman I used to be creak awake. The woman who once drove to the coast by herself, just because she wanted to hear the ocean without asking anyone's permission. All right, I said. Let's do it. That word, all right, was the first stone I set in a wall that would eventually stand between me and my daughter's control. A week later, paperwork was underway. Accounts being rearranged like chess pieces. I walked out of the bank holding my own pen, my own signature, my own life. Clara still had no idea. Not yet. She found out the way women like her always do, through notifications she believed only she should see. She showed up 2 days earlier than planned from her business trip, marched into my garden and said without a hello, "You've been talking to people you shouldn't." For the first time in years I didn't shrink. I set down my garden shears, wiped my hands on my jeans and said, "Yes, Clara. I finally have." You never truly know who someone is until the day you stop letting them answer every question for you and start asking your own. Clara had always been good at sounding reasonable while making me feel irrational. That's a skill, you know. Some people learn piano. Some people learn how to turn concern into a leash. She paced the kitchen like a lawyer addressing a hostile witness, except the hostile witness was her own mother. "You don't understand what you're risking," she said, hand slicing the air. "You're letting strangers mess with things you can't possibly handle at your age. Lawyers. Neighbors. That old friend of Dad's is probably senile, Mom. He'll confuse you. You could lose everything." I stirred sugar into my tea just to have something to do with my hands. "I met with Paul," I said quietly. "He's quite clear. And so am I." She stared at me as if I'd started speaking a language she didn't recognize. "Since when do you make big decisions without talking to me first?" she demanded. I almost laughed. "Since when?" "Since I remembered that the woman who raised you wasn't born needing your permission." "But I didn't say that." "Not yet. I appreciate what you've done," I replied. "But I need to manage my own life again. My own house. My own money. My own friendships." Her jaw worked. She tried a new angle. "You're being manipulated," she insisted. "Mrs. Gray has always been jealous. People talk about me in this town. They're threatened by how successful I am. They're using you to hurt me." There it was, the pivot from protector to victim. Another trick in her well-worn bag. I let a long silence stretch between us until she started to fidget. Then I said, "If your life is so strong and ethical, Clara, a retired neighbor and an old lawyer shouldn't be able to topple it." Her eyes flashed. For a moment, I saw the naked anger she usually hid behind her professional smile. She went home that night without hugging me, without checking the fridge, without leaving instructions on the counter. The next day she sent an email. 12 bullet points. Subject line: clarifying our financial boundaries. It read like a company memo, cold, polished, full of veiled accusations. I didn't respond. Silence, I was learning, could be a form of self-defense. Then came the charm offensive. A bouquet of lilies. A silk scarf. My favorite tea. A framed photograph of us at her college graduation with a note, "Remember when we were a team?" Each gift was something I loved, wrapped around something she wanted. My remorse, my surrender. I placed them all carefully in a box in the hall closet. I didn't throw them away, resentment isn't my way, but I wouldn't display them either. The next visit came with tears. She arrived barefaced, hair messy, eyes red. The girl I raised peeked out from behind the woman she'd become, and I felt my heart ache in that old familiar way. "I'm sorry," she said, voice trembling. "I've been under so much stress. I don't want to lose you. You know that, right?" I made her tea. Sat her at the same table where I once taught her how to write her name. She spoke about responsibility, about feeling like she was all alone after her father died, about how she'd had to grow up too fast and take care of me. Some of it was true. That's what made it powerful. "If you just sign one last paper," she whispered eventually, sliding a document across the table as if it were a napkin, "it would take so much pressure off. Just a simple authorization so I can act if something happens to you." For both our sakes. I looked down. Words and lines and legal phrases. Her name next to mine again. Years ago, I wouldn't have read past the first paragraph. This time I read every line. It gives you control of my assets if I'm deemed incompetent, I murmured. That's standard language, she said quickly. It's just a formality. No, I said, and this time my voice didn't tremble at all. The standard part was me signing anything you put in front of me. That part is over. She stared at me like she was waiting for the punchline. There wasn't one. You're being impossible, she whispered. Everyone's trying to help you. I know, I replied, standing up slowly. Including me. I slid the paper back toward her without a signature. That night I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I invited someone other than my daughter into my house on purpose. Helen came over. We drank lemonade on the porch and talked like women, not like patient and caregiver. She told me about her own battles with a son who thought he knew better. I told her for the first time out loud, I'm done being managed. Before bed, I took out a small notebook and wrote one sentence on the first page. Today I chose myself and the sky did not fall. What I didn't know then was that choosing myself wouldn't just cost me my daughter's approval, it would make her dangerous in ways I never imagined. That knock from Adult Protective Services, the one I told you about at the start, that wasn't random. It was Clara's last desperate attempt to put my life back into her hands, even if she had to wrap those hands in official-looking concern. The week before they arrived, the phone calls started coming from numbers I didn't recognize. One young man said he was just checking in from my daughter's office, asked irrelevant questions about my memory, my medications, whether I had trouble understanding complex paperwork. His tone was polite, but every word felt like he was trying to tuck me into a box labeled incompetent. I ended that call quickly and dialed Paul. She's trying to build a case, he said bluntly. If she can convince the right people you're not capable, she can get control again, even without your consent. I sat very still. Can she do that? Not easily, he replied. Not with the documentation we've gathered. But she can make your life miserable for a while trying. We're going to shore everything up. So we did. I signed an affidavit affirming my capacity, with Paul and a nurse I'd known for years as witnesses. We placed copies with the bank, my doctor, the county records. I felt ridiculous and proud at the same time, like having to prove I was alive, but finding comfort in my own heartbeat. And still the knock came. When the woman in the navy blazer asked if anyone had been trying to control my finances, I almost smiled. The irony was too sharp not to notice. Yes, I thought. Yes, someone has. She wears perfume I used to buy her for Christmas. Out loud I answered each question carefully, like I was weaving a net out of truth. Who helps you with your bills, Mrs. Harper? I do, I said, laying out statements with my signature neatly in place. Do you understand where your money is held? Yes, I replied, showing them the folder Paul insisted I keep updated. Accounts, balances, contact names. Do you feel pressured by anyone to sign documents you don't understand? I let the silence sit for a moment. I used to, I said finally. I don't anymore. By the time they left, their expressions had shifted from polite suspicion to something like quiet respect. The woman squeezed my hand at the door. Not everyone we visit is as prepared as you, she said. If you ever feel unsafe, you call us directly. Don't wait for someone else to report it for you. I know exactly who reported it, I said gently. But thank you. The moment the door clicked shut, I stood there feeling oddly steady. My daughter had tried to use the system like a weapon. The system had come, looked me in the eyes and said, "We see you." Not just her story about you. Called Paul again. He was furious on my behalf. She's crossed into harassment now, he said. We'll send a cease and desist. In legal terms, that's us saying, we see what you're doing, and so does the law. The letter went out that afternoon. Short, firm, devastatingly clear. Any further interference in my affairs could result in legal action. I thought that might stop her. I should have known better. The rumor started first soft like background noise. Little comments from neighbors who suddenly asked me twice if I was feeling all right. A woman at the pharmacy who offered, a little too eagerly, to help me read my prescription labels. Then one morning Helen walked up my path holding the local newspaper like it was a dead bird. "You need to see this," she said. Second page. Small column. No names but enough details that anyone who knew us would recognize the silhouettes. A dedicated real estate agent struggling with an elderly mother's declining judgment. Difficult financial decisions. Concerned family members forced to step in for her own good. I wasn't mentioned by name, but I was in every line. Clara hadn't gone to war with me. She had gone to war with my reputation. I sat down, folded the newspaper carefully, and felt something inside me harden, not into hate but into resolve. If she wanted to tell a story about me, then I would tell mine louder. There comes a point when staying quiet hurts more than being talked about, and that was the day. I decided to stop surviving and start speaking. When you're young, you think justice arrives with trumpets. When you're my age, you learn it usually comes in sensible shoes carrying a notebook. Her name was Hannah, a local journalist with kind eyes and a fierce note-taking hand. The paper that printed Clara's little masterpiece of manipulation agreed to hear my side. We met in a corner booth at the cafe near the community center. Margaret and Joan from pottery class sat a few tables away, pretending to read just in case I needed them. There's nothing quite like the quiet army of women who've survived their own storms. "I don't want to smear peace," I told Hannah. "I'm not trying to ruin my daughter. I just won't let her use me as the tragic centerpiece in her story anymore." "Tell me what happened," she said, clicking her pen. So I did. I told her about the tea and the don't talk to the neighbors. About the forms I signed. About the day I opened my own filing cabinet and realized my life had more of Clara's handwriting on it than my own. I told her about Helen's warning, Nathan's concern, Paul's careful patience, the Adult Protective Services knock, the article that painted my daughter as a saint and me as a fragile, confused inconvenience. I showed her the documents, the revoked power of attorney, the trust in my own name, the affidavit affirming my mental capacity. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't dramatize. I just laid out the pieces and let them form the picture. When the article finally ran 2 weeks later, the headline wasn't about revenge. It was about a pattern. When protection becomes control, one widow's fight to keep her own name. My name, not Clara's. It spoke of a growing quiet crisis, adult children using concern as a way to gain access to assets. It named laws I hadn't known existed. It quoted lawyers, social workers, and other elders who'd been through similar things. I was just one story among many. That's what made it powerful. Neighbors started looking at me differently, less like a cautionary tale, more like someone who'd walked through a fire and come out with her hair only slightly singed. A few days after the article, the first stranger approached me at the community center. A woman my age, hands shaking. "I read about you," she whispered. "My son keeps all my cards for safety. I thought it was just what good sons did. But now, I'm not so sure." We sat in a room that smelled of clay and coffee, and I repeated Paul's phone number from memory. I told her, "You're not crazy, and you're not ungrateful for wanting your own life." Helping her felt like rinsing the last of Clara's fingerprints off my skin. Clara called that night. Her voice was cold enough to crack glass. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" she hissed. "You've humiliated me. My boss saw that article. My clients are asking questions." "I told the truth," I said. "That's all." "The truth doesn't matter," she snapped. "Perception does. You made me look like a monster." I thought of Helen's words, of Joan's gentle hand on mine at pottery class, of the APS worker's steady gaze. "You did that yourself," I replied quietly. "I just stopped covering it up." She hung up on me. 2 days later, Paul called with an update. "Her firm has started an internal review," he said. "Several elderly clients have come forward with concerns about contracts they signed with her. There are irregularities. They've suspended her pending investigation." I sat at my kitchen table, looking at the same chair where Clara used to do her homework. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt done. Sometimes justice doesn't feel like victory. It feels like somebody finally turning off a noise you didn't realize had been blaring in the background for years. Helen passed away shortly after that. Quietly in her sleep, the way women who've done enough sometimes leave. At her memorial, the church was full. People spoke of her as if she'd been a lighthouse in a town that pretended not to have any storms. I sat there listening, hand on my purse where my little notebook rested, and thought, if she hadn't stood at that fence and said my daughter's name with concern rather than envy, I might still be sleeping through my own life. On the way home, Margaret squeezed my shoulder. You know, she said, Helen didn't just save you. You're saving others now, whether you meant to or not. That night, I lit a candle on my windowsill for Helen, for the women in my pottery class, for every old girl who'd ever been told she was lucky someone else was making decisions for her. Then I opened my notebook and wrote, Strength isn't shouting I won. It's quietly teaching someone else they don't have to lose. I thought the story might end there, with my freedom and my daughter's downfall, but life rarely closes its books so neatly, especially when blood is involved. Autumn came on tiptoe that year. Gold leaves, soft rain, the creak of old branches that hadn't quite decided whether to let go. It had been several months since Clara's suspension. No calls, no emails, no gifts on the doorstep pretending to be apologies. The silence felt strange at first, then peaceful, then normal. I filled my days with small, deliberate joys. Morning walks to the cafe where Margaret and Joan waited with 2 seats saved and 3 opinions ready. Pottery classes where my bowls finally looked like something someone might actually put soup in. A little volunteer group helping older residents untangle their bills and forms, the very knots I'd once been trapped in. Sometimes, sitting in those cramped offices, watching someone's hands shake as they handed me a stack of envelopes, I'd see a flash of my own reflection from last year. It didn't frighten me. It reminded me why I'd chosen to speak. One afternoon, I was in the supermarket, staring at a shelf of pasta sauces. You'd be surprised how peaceful that can feel when no one is timing your grocery trip or critiquing your choices. Mom! Her voice sounded smaller than I remembered. I turned and there she was holding a basket instead of a briefcase. Her hair was less perfect. There were dark circles under her eyes that concealer couldn't quite hide. Clara, I said, nodding. We stood there in the harsh supermarket lighting, caught between the frozen peas and the cereal, like 2 actors who'd forgotten their lines mid-scene. You look good, she said, voice unsteady. So do you, I lied, because some habits die harder than others. We made small talk. The weather. The town. My pottery. Her time off. Then she asked, looking at the floor. Are you still angry with me? I took my time answering. No, I said. Anger's too heavy to carry this long. I put it down. She nodded, swallowing hard. I lost my license, she blurted. They found things. Contracts. Clients complained after that article. No one wants to work with me now. I know, I said softly. News travels fast in small towns, especially bad news. I didn't mean for it to go this far, she whispered. I was just trying to secure things. For you. For me. I thought if I didn't take control, someone else would. You did take control, I replied gently. But not of the right things. She flinched, but she kept looking at me. That was new. I thought I was helping you, she said. No, I answered, and there was no malice in it. Only truth. You were helping yourself and calling it love. I let you. That part's on me too. She stared at me like she was seeing a stranger. Or maybe she was finally seeing her mother as someone separate from her for the first time. So that's it? She asked after a moment. We're just done. I thought of everything that had happened, the papers, the reports, the knock on my door. The way she tried to save her image at the cost of my autonomy. The way I'd allowed it for far too long. No, I said slowly. We're not done. You'll always be my daughter. But I won't be your project anymore. Or your shield. Or your excuse. Silence settled between us. Heavy but honest. She nodded once, a jerky little movement, then turned her cart and walked away. I didn't follow. When I stepped out of the store, the sky was that soft gray that promises rain but doesn't quite commit. I took a deep breath. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel broken. I felt clear. Weeks later, a small card arrived in the mail. No return address. Just my name, written in a handwriting I'd once taught how to hold a pencil. Inside was one sentence. I'm sorry for everything. Clara. No justifications. No but. No explanations. I slid the card into the back of my new notebook. Not the old one full of fear and tracking and battle, This one filled with little joys. Bowls I'd shaped. Books I'd loved. Recipes I'd finally mastered without asking anyone's approval. I didn't call her. I didn't frame it. I didn't throw it away. I let it be what it was. A late apology on a road I was no longer walking down. On the first morning of the new year, I opened my window and let the cold air spill into the kitchen. The neighborhood was quiet, dusted with a thin film of frost. Somewhere a dog barked. A child laughed. Life moved as it always had, with or without my permission. I made my coffee, stood at the sink where I'd once stared at my own reflection and wondered when I disappeared, and I thought about that knock from Adult Protective Services. They had come to ask if I knew what my daughter was doing. The real question, I realized now, had always been the opposite. Did my daughter know what I was capable of? Once I stopped letting her write my story for me, I smiled to myself and said it out loud, just to hear it in my own voice. I will never again mistake control for care. And I will never again apologize for living my own life. Then I stepped away from the window, from the past, from the long shadow of a love that had tried to shrink me. The house felt different somehow. Not safer. Not quieter. Just mine. Because in the end, my dear, the real miracle wasn't that I kept my home or my money. It was that I finally came home to myself. And no one, not even my own child, gets to sign that away again.